The Kansas plains stretch flat and endless under a sky the color of old bone. No hills, no trees to interrupt the horizon. Just land going on until it simply stops and above it everything. A gravel road cuts through the emptiness. Dust rising. A bus, moving through the middle of nowhere like it has somewhere to be. Inside, pressed against the window, a boy, 17, worn backpack on his lap, a golden retriever asleep across his feet. His eyes fixed on land he has never seen before, land that somehow now belongs to him. A cream-colored envelope in his jacket pocket. Two sentences inside it. He has read them 11 times. He still doesn't understand why a dead man who never met him left behind everything he owned. But somewhere in this boy's past in a war no one talks about in 90 seconds, no one witnessed something happened. And it is still moving. Part 1, the letter. The dishwater was never hot enough at the start of a shift. By the end, it scalded. Caleb Merritt had learned to stop noticing the difference. He stood at the industrial sink in the back of Rosario's Diner, Tulsa, Oklahoma, 11:17 on a Tuesday night, scrubbing dried egg off the underside of a ceramic plate that had seen better decades. The kitchen fan rattled above him like something was loose inside it. Something was always loose inside it. He had mentioned it to the manager 4 times. The manager had nodded 4 times. The fan still rattled. Outside the back door, he could hear Finn. Not barking, not whining, just the soft, patient sound of a golden retriever settling his weight on the concrete step. Waiting. The way Finn always waited, like time was not a thing that bothered him particularly. Caleb scrubbed the plate. The fan rattled. Finn waited. This was Tuesday. Tuesday was the same as Monday, which had been the same as the Sunday before it, which stretched back in an unbroken chain of identical evenings all the way to September, when school started again and Caleb began running the numbers in his head during third period algebra, and realized that working 4 nights a week was not going to be enough. It was not going to be enough by a distance he could not afford to think about directly. So he didn't. He scrubbed plates instead. The diner closed at 10. By the time the last table was cleared and the kitchen wiped down, it was closer to 11. Caleb untied his apron and hung it on the hook by the back door with the precision of someone who has repeated a motion so many times it has become automatic. He pulled on his jacket, checked his phone. No messages. He pushed the back door open. Finn was sitting exactly where he had been sitting for the past 4 hours. Ears up, tail moving in one slow sweep when the door opened. Not frantic, not demanding, just there. The specific there-ness of Finn was something Caleb had stopped being able to articulate. It was just a fact now, like the rattling fan and the cold water and the walk home through the October dark. Finn was there. That was the shape of things. He counted the tips from his section on the walk home. $41 and a note on a napkin from table 7 that said, "God bless you, young man," in shaky cursive, which was kind but did not pay for anything specific. Finn walked beside him without a leash. He didn't need one. The dog had been trained for hospital work, the kind of training that teaches an animal to move slowly, to stay close, to read a room with his nose before his eyes. When Caleb's mother, Sandra, had been admitted to St. Francis for her second round of chemotherapy, Finn had been part of the hospital's therapy program. He would come into the ward on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, moving room to room, resting his big golden head on the edge of a bed when someone needed the weight of it. Sandra had needed the weight of it. Caleb had watched from the doorway one afternoon and seen his mother, who did not cry, had not cried once since the diagnosis, who approached her illness the way she approached every difficult thing, which was to lower her chin and push through it, rest her hand in Finn's fur, and close her eyes for 4 full seconds. 4 seconds of not fighting. He had decided then that if the hospital program ever ended, he was taking the dog. The program ended in June. Budget cuts. The coordinator had been apologetic and tired in the way people get when they have delivered the same bad news too many times. Caleb was not apologetic. He was at the front desk with a signed adoption form before she finished the sentence. Finn had walked out of St. Francis beside him like he had always known this was the plan. Maybe he had. The apartment was quiet when they got home. It was always quiet now. Sandra had been admitted full-time in August when the second round of treatment began and the side effects became too unpredictable to manage alone. Caleb cooked for himself, which meant eggs and whatever was marked down at the grocery store. He did his homework at the kitchen table because the silence in his bedroom felt different from the silence in the kitchen. Denser, more specific. He fed Finn. He looked at the kitchen table. He went to bed without eating. The phone rang at 7:43 the next morning. Caleb was still half asleep, lying on top of his blanket in the way you do when you got home too late to bother getting under it. His room was small. There was a desk with textbooks stacked on it that he actually read, because being behind in school was one problem he could control, and the rest of his life had enough problems he couldn't. The number was St. Francis. His stomach dropped before he answered. "Mr. Merritt." The nurse had a careful voice, the kind of careful that medical people develop when they have to deliver information that is heavy, but not immediately catastrophic. A specific skill. Caleb had learned to parse it in the last 8 months. Careful meant bad, but not the worst. Gentle meant worse. Very gentle meant call someone. This was careful. "Your mother's scan results came back. Dr. Okafor would like to schedule a consultation." He sat in a plastic chair outside Dr. Okafor's office at 9:15. Finn was outside tied to a bench in the parking lot because the hospital had a no-pets policy that the lobby security enforced with the energy of a man who had been waiting his entire career for a rule that mattered. Dr. Okafor was a compact woman with reading glasses she wore on top of her head until she needed them, at which point she brought them down in a single practice motion, and you understood the conversation was now serious. She brought them down almost immediately. The tumor had not grown. That was the good news, and she said it first. The good news was also that surgery remained an option, a real option, not a last resort. If the mass was removed within the next 90 days, Sandra's prognosis improved significantly. Dr. Okafor used the word significantly with precision, the way doctors do when they mean something specific by it and don't want it misinterpreted. Caleb asked about cost. There was a pause that lasted approximately 2 seconds. $34,000 out of pocket after insurance, payment plans available, financial assistance applications they could help him fill out, resources, $34,000. He said thank you and walked out and sat on the bench in the parking lot for 11 minutes without moving. The bench where Finn was tied. Finn watched him with the patient attention of a dog who has learned that some moments require presence rather than action. Caleb sat. Finn sat beside him. The parking lot went about its business. Caleb got out his phone, put it back in his pocket, got it out again, put it back. $34,000. Okay. Okay. How? He didn't tell Sandra the number. He told her the surgery was possible. He told her the timeline. He told her Dr. Okafor thought it was the right call. Sandra Merritt was 42 years old and had been fighting her diagnosis for 8 months with the focused intensity of a woman who had been fighting various things her entire adult life and had simply added one more to the list. She had raised Caleb alone since he was 9. She had worked accounts receivable at a trucking company, and then logistics coordinator, and then briefly her own bookkeeping service, before the diagnosis, before the fatigue, before the world rearranged itself around her illness, with the thoroughness of a flood that gets into everything. She did not ask Caleb about the money. She looked at him the way mothers look when they know exactly what their child is not saying and have decided for reasons of their own to let it go. "Come here," she said. He sat on the edge of the hospital bed, and she put her hand on the back of his neck, the way she had done since he was small, and the weight of it was the same as it had always been. Same hand, same weight. He was 17 years old, and he was so tired he could feel it in his back teeth. The envelope was in the mailbox when he got home. He almost missed it. He was thinking about the $34,000 again, running the math in slow circles the way you do when you know the math doesn't work, but you keep trying different arrangements of the same numbers, hoping something will change. He had not missed something. He had $41 in a napkin from a stranger and a kitchen that was too quiet. The envelope was cream-colored, heavy paper, the kind of envelope that contains either something very important or very boring, and there is no way to know which until you open it. Greer and Associates Attorneys at Law, Ashford, Kansas. Caleb stood at the mailbox. He did not know anyone in Kansas. He opened it on the porch steps, Finn sitting beside him with his chin resting on Caleb's knee, because Finn had excellent instincts about when his presence was required. It was 3 pages. Legal language, dense, the kind of sentences that wrap around themselves twice before arriving at the point. Caleb read it once fast and then went back to the beginning and read it slowly. His father was mentioned on the first page. Marcus James Merritt, United States Marine Corps, deceased 2016. Caleb stopped reading, looked up at the street. A truck went by. A kid on a bicycle. Normal Tuesday afternoon on a normal street in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where nothing unusual happened, and the fan rattled and the water scalded, and the numbers never added up. He looked back at the page. Walter Edwin Greer, late of Ashford, Kansas, hereby bequeaths to Caleb James Merritt, son of Marcus James Merritt, the entirety of the property known as Greer Farm, comprising approximately 380 acres of agricultural land, outbuildings, equipment, and the primary residence. He had to read it 4 times, not because the language was unclear, because it was impossible. 380 acres, a farm, in Kansas, from a man he had never heard of, a man named Walter Greer, who had known his father, who had, for reasons contained in a sealed letter tucked inside the documents, decided to leave everything he owned to a 17-year-old boy he had never met. Conditions: Caleb must present himself to the property within 21 days of the date of this document. He must establish primary residence. He must remain for a minimum of 6 calendar months. If these conditions were not met, the estate would pass to the next legal heir. Caleb sat on the porch steps for a long time. Finn put his head in his lap. A farm in Kansas. What? The sealed letter was 1-page handwritten. The handwriting was angular and deliberate, the penmanship of a man who had learned to write when people were still taught to care about it. Not elegant, just precise. Every letter formed with intention. 2 sentences. Your father did not leave you much because he gave me the only thing that truly mattered, the chance to come home. This is what I owe him in return. Caleb read it 5 times. Then he sat in his father's old chair, the green one, with the armrest that had started to fray on the right side, the one his mother had offered to replace 3 times, and he had refused each time without exactly explaining why, and he held the letter in both hands and tried to think clearly. His father, Marcus Merritt, Marine, 2 tours, Iraq, died in 2016 from complications of a traumatic brain injury that had been accumulating quietly for years before anyone gave it a name or understood what it was doing inside his skull. Caleb had been 9 years old. He remembered his father as a series of images, the way you remember things from when you were small, not full scenes, but fragments. The smell of his work jacket, the specific way he laughed, which started silent before the sound caught up. His hands, which were large and careful and always seemed to know exactly what they were doing. He had never talked about Iraq, not once, not in any way that revealed anything real. He talked around it the way you drive around a flooded road. You acknowledge it exists, you note it's there, and then you find another route and keep moving. And now a man named Walter Greer was dead and had left everything he owned in Kansas to a boy from Tulsa, and the reason, according to 2 handwritten sentences, had something to do with Marcus Merritt coming home. What did you do, Dad? It was not a question with a clear answer, or maybe it was the most important question Caleb had ever asked. He told Sandra about it that evening. She read the documents carefully, the way she read everything carefully. The same methodical attention she applied to insurance forms and medication schedules and bills that arrived in envelopes designed to look less serious than they were. When she finished, she set them on the blanket across her lap and looked at Caleb. You're thinking about going. I'm thinking about the $34,000. Caleb. A farm is worth money, Mom. If I could sell it. You can't sell it, not for 6 months. Read the conditions again. He had read the conditions. He had read them 6 times. She was right, and he knew she was right, and that did not make the math work any better. Sandra was quiet for a moment. Who was Walter Greer? She said, more to herself than to him. I don't know. Your father never mentioned him. Dad never mentioned anyone from over there. She accepted this with the brief silence it deserved because it was simply true. The letter says Dad saved his life, Caleb said. Somehow, in Iraq, but it doesn't say how. Sandra looked at the handwritten page for a long time. Your father came home from his second tour different, she said finally. He didn't talk about it. I didn't push. That was a mistake on my part, probably. But he needed quiet, and I gave him quiet. She paused. He must have done something over there. Something this man thought was worth all of this. Caleb looked at the documents on her lap. 380 acres, a man's entire life, left to someone because of something Marcus Merritt did in the middle of a war. In a moment no one had ever mentioned in a story that had traveled quietly for years before arriving in a cream-colored envelope in a mailbox in Tulsa. I have to go, Caleb said. Sandra looked at him, not surprised, not trying to talk him out of it. I know, she said. He found the bus ticket online. Tulsa to Dodge City, then a connection north to Ashford. $47 one way. He bought it and did not buy a return ticket, which either meant he was committed or he was running out of money. Both. He packed the old green military backpack that had belonged to his father. It smelled faintly of canvas and something else, machine oil maybe, or just the specific smell of a thing that has been kept carefully for a long time by someone who understood the value of things that last. He packed 3 changes of clothes, his textbooks because he was not dropping out of school, his phone charger, the legal documents, and the handwritten letter. He put the letter in the front pocket, separate from everything else. He wasn't sure why. It just seemed like the kind of thing you kept close. Finn watched him pack from the doorway of his room, his large golden head tilting slightly left as each item went into the bag. "You're coming," Caleb told him. "Obviously." Finn's tail moved once. The bus left at 6:40 in the morning. Sandra was not well enough to come to the station. She had Caleb sit beside her on the hospital bed the night before, and she held his face in both hands, which she had not done since he was very small, and looked at him directly the way she did when she needed him to actually hear her and not just process the sounds. "Call me every day. Every day. Don't be proud about asking for help. If the neighbors know more than you ask them." "Okay. Your father always thought asking for help meant he'd failed at something. It cost him." She paused. "Don't carry that part of him." "What part should I carry?" She thought about it seriously, the way she thought about things that deserve serious thought. "He always did what he thought was right," she said, "even when it was hard, even when no one was watching." Another pause. "Especially when no one was watching." Caleb leaned his forehead against hers for a moment. She smelled like hospital soap and her own specific self, and he stayed there one breath longer than was practical. Finn slept for most of the bus ride with his chin on Caleb's thigh, his breathing slow and steady and warm. Caleb watched Kansas arrive through the window. It was different from Oklahoma, or almost identical to Oklahoma. He couldn't decide which was more accurate. The sky was wider here, or maybe the land was flatter, and the flatness made the sky appear wider, which was not the same thing. Fields spread in every direction without apology. Grain elevators rose out of the flatness at intervals like pale punctuation. The light in late October was thin and gold and came at a low angle that made everything cast long shadows even at noon. He had the documents in his bag and the letter in his front pocket, and $41 left after the bus ticket, and he was going to a farm he had never seen to find out something about a man who had never told him. Okay, he thought, fine. What could go wrong? What could possibly— Don't finish that sentence, Caleb. Finn shifted in his sleep, pushing his nose deeper into Caleb's leg. The bus rolled on. The Ashford station was a single room with a ceiling fan, a vending machine that produced a sound when you pushed the buttons, but no actual food, and a woman behind a desk who gave him directions to Greer Farm without him having to ask, because apparently she recognized the address from the documents in his hand, and small towns have their own efficient systems for knowing things. He walked. It was 3 miles. Finn did not mind. Caleb's backpack straps dug into his shoulders, and the Kansas wind came straight across the open fields without anything to slow it, which was bracing in the particular way that things are bracing when you have no alternative to experiencing them. He smelled the farm before he saw it. Dry earth, old wood warming in the afternoon sun. Something underneath that was more complex, the specific combination of soil and machinery and seasons that means a place has been worked for a long time. And then the gravel road curved around a stand of cottonwood trees, and the property opened up before him. The house was white once, or close to white. The paint had faded to a color that was more the memory of white, the suggestion of it. Chips and patches and bare wood showing through in places, especially along the south-facing wall, where the sun had been at it for years without negotiation. A covered porch wrapped around the front, with 2 wooden rocking chairs on it and an empty coffee mug sitting on the railing between them. Still there from the last morning someone had sat there. Walt probably, sitting with his coffee looking at his fields. The barn behind the house was enormous in red and slightly terrifying in its scale. The fields beyond the barn went on farther than Caleb could fully track. Some of them were clearly worked dark soil, straight furrows, something recently turned. Others were tall grass and weeds, in the particular look of land that has been left to make its own decisions for a season or two. There was a fence along the north edge, broken in two places he could see from the road. Machinery sat near the barn, a large tractor, a smaller one. Equipment he didn't have names for, and even from this distance, something about the stillness of it suggested these things had not moved in a while. Finn stopped beside him and assessed the property with the calm professionalism of a dog trained to evaluate new environments without drama. Caleb assessed it with considerably less calm. Okay, he thought, it's just a farm. It's just 380 acres of farmland with broken fences and possibly broken machinery and outstanding tax obligations and a complete absence of anyone who knows what they're doing. It's fine. Caleb, it is not fine. The man standing by the gate did not look like he'd been waiting. He looked like he'd been there long enough that waiting had simply become standing. He was in his mid-40s, lean and straight, in a dark navy suit that was correct for a law office and profoundly incorrect for a gravel road in rural Kansas in October. He had a briefcase, a phone in one hand, the professionally calibrated expression of someone who has learned to present the same face whether delivering good news or bad. Caleb Merritt, yes. Glenn Hurst. He extended his hand. I'm an attorney representing the estate. I should also tell you up front, I'm Walt's nephew, the only living relative. Caleb shook his hand. Finn sat and examined Glenn with polite neutrality. I want to be respectful of why you're here, Glenn said. His voice was measured, not unkind, genuinely measured, which was different from performed kindness. And my uncle made his intentions very clear in the will. But I think we should talk before you go through that gate. All right, Caleb said. My uncle was a good man, deliberate. He thought things through before he decided them. He paused. He decided this a long time ago. I know that. I've read the will several times. Another pause. I also know that you're 17 years old and this is 380 acres of working land with outstanding tax obligations equipment that hasn't been properly serviced in 2 years and an irrigation system that's only partially complete. He looked at Caleb directly. A fair amount of money now might serve you and your family considerably better than a complicated inheritance. He named a number, $890,000. Cash, closed in 30 days. Caleb was quiet. The number was very large. The number was $34,000 multiplied by a significant amount. He thought about Sandra in the hospital bed with her hand on the back of his neck. He thought about Dr. Okafor and her glasses coming down. He thought about the handwritten letter in his front pocket and 2 sentences that didn't say nearly enough about a man who apparently gave a stranger the chance to come home. I appreciate the offer, Caleb said. I need to think about it. Glenn nodded. He had expected this answer and had no visible reaction to it either way. Of course, take the time you need. My offer will remain open. He left his card on the gatepost and drove away in a rental car that was conspicuously clean against the backdrop of the gravel road. Caleb stood at the gate, looked at the house, looked at the barn, looked at the fields, looked at Finn. Finn looked back with the particular expression he used when a decision needed to be made, and he had decided not to rush it. Caleb opened the gate. The inside of the house was nothing like the outside. Outside, it looked abandoned. Inside, it looked like someone had stepped away and expected to come back. Dishes stacked neatly in the drying rack, a wool blanket folded over the back of the couch with deliberate care. A pair of work boots by the front door set there with intention heels, together toes pointing out, not dropped or kicked aside. Books on shelves with the spines facing out organized by a system Caleb couldn't immediately identify, but which clearly existed. Photographs on the walls, a man standing in fields, standing beside machinery, standing at what looked like a county fair, younger smiling in the open way people smile in photographs from before everyone understood they were performing. Walter Greer. Caleb stood in front of one photograph for a long time. The man had a broad chest and forearms browned from decades of Kansas sun and deep lines at the corners of his eyes from squinting into that same sun. He looked solid in the way that people look when they have spent their lives doing work that requires their whole body. His face was not harsh, not soft either, just honest, present, the face of someone who looked at things directly. Caleb had expected to feel something specific when he saw the face of the man who had left him everything. He mostly felt the strangeness of it, the structural impossibility, 2 sentences and 380 acres in a photograph of a stranger on a wall. Finn moved through the ground floor with methodical interest, nose to the floor, cataloging the house room by room. In the systematic way he cataloged everything new. Caleb went to the kitchen. He found the notebook in the bottom drawer of the kitchen desk. Not looking for it. He was looking for a can opener because he had canned soup in his bag and hadn't eaten since the gas station outside Dodge City. The drawer had a can opener and also a collection of rubber bands that had lost their elasticity, 2 screwdrivers, a flashlight, and a worn leather notebook pressed against the back. He pulled out the can opener. He looked at the notebook. He stood there for a moment. Then he pulled it out. The cover was dark brown soft from use. RG stamped into the leather in small letters near the bottom corner. Not WGRG. He opened it. The handwriting inside was different from the letter. Smaller. More careful. The letters rounded where Walt's had been angular. The pressure lighter. Ruth Greer. He recognized the name from the legal documents. Walter's wife deceased 3 years prior. He almost closed it. It was someone else's private thing, clearly. Someone's private record of private thoughts. And Ruth Greer had been dead for 3 years and had no opportunity to decide whether she wanted a stranger reading what she'd written. And then his eye caught the last page. It was not full of regular entries. Only a few lines. The handwriting shakier than the pages before it, the handwriting of someone whose hands were not fully cooperating anymore, but who had something that needed to be said regardless. He read it. Walt, find the soldier's son. Give the boy a real home. It's the right thing. It's the only right thing we have left to do. I love you. Don't argue with me when I'm gone. Caleb stood in the kitchen of Walt Greer's house and read those lines 3 times. 4. Not Walt, Ruth. A woman he had never heard of. A woman who had died in this house 3 years ago, probably in a room upstairs, probably with Walt beside her. A woman who had read about a soldier, his father, and decided from whatever she knew of that story that the soldier's son deserved something, and had told Walt not to argue about it when she was gone. Finn came into the kitchen and sat beside him. The late afternoon light came through the window over the sink and caught the dust in the air and made it look like something suspended, something waiting. She said, "Don't argue with me when I'm gone." Caleb almost smiled. He did not entirely know why. He folded down the corner of the last page carefully and closed the notebook and set it on the kitchen counter where he could see it. He opened his soup. The knock came at dusk. 3 knocks, deliberate, not loud. Finn stood, ears lifting, but did not make a sound, which with Finn meant not a threat, just a person arriving. Caleb opened the door. The woman on the porch was in her late 60s, solidly built with gray-white hair, cut practically short, and eyes the color of very old wood, dark and warm and patient, in a way that had clearly been earned rather than inherited. She wore jeans and heavy work boots and a flannel shirt the color of dried cedar, and held a pan covered with a dish towel. She looked at Caleb with an expression that was neither pity nor surprise. Assessment. Direct and without performance. "Dorothy Callahan," she said. "I farmed the parcel due east. My husband and I were neighbors with Walt for 23 years. A pause. "Walt told me someone was coming." Caleb blinked. "He told you?" "He told me a number of things." She held out the pan. "Cornbread. It's better warm. I doubt you've organized anything for dinner." He hadn't. Finn appeared at Caleb's knee and looked at the woman with his full golden attention, the particular focus he brought to people he was in the process of evaluating. Dorothy looked down at him. Something moved across her face. Brief. A flicker of something that passed before Caleb could name it, something between recognition and an old private pain. "Walt said he trusted you," she said. Not to Finn, to Caleb, but still looking at the dog. "He didn't know me," Caleb said. "No." She looked up. "He knew your father." She said it simply, the way you say something that is just true and doesn't require decoration. "What did he know?" Caleb asked. She looked at him for a moment, long enough that he understood she was considering how much to say. "Enough," she said finally. "Eat something. The morning comes early out here." She put the pan in his hands and turned and walked back across the porch and down the steps and across the darkening yard toward the fence line between the 2 properties. She moved without hurrying. Someone who had covered this ground so many times that the distance was simply a fact, not an inconvenience. Finn watched her go. Caleb stood in the doorway holding warm cornbread, and felt the strangeness of the day settle around him like something with actual weight. The Kansas sky overhead was enormous in the way it gets when the dark comes, and there's nothing between you and all of it. Stars he hadn't seen in Tulsa, too many rooftops, too many lights competing. Out here, nothing competed with anything. Walt knew your father. Enough. He went inside. That night he read more of Ruth's notebook. Not all of it. He stopped at the entries near the end when the handwriting started to change. She was sick. By then you could tell the way the letters lost their evenness. Some days better than others, some entries clearly written when her hands were steadier than the last. One entry dated about 5 weeks before the final page. W came in tonight looking like he'd been carrying something for a long time and had finally decided to put it on the table. I asked him what. He said he'd heard back from the records office. Found the name. Marcus Merritt, Sergeant USMC. Honorable discharge. Died 2016. Left a wife and a son in Tulsa, Oklahoma. W sat at the kitchen table for a long time after that. I didn't say anything. I waited. That's the thing about 40 years together, you learn when to wait. He finally said, "What do we do with this?" I said, "You know what we do." He said, "It feels like an enormous thing to give to a stranger." I said, "You came home." His family didn't get that. Yes, it's an enormous thing. That's the point. Caleb closed the notebook. Finn was asleep beside him on the couch, one paw draped across Caleb's knee. The dog's breathing was slow and even and very present. His father. Walt had searched for his father's name, had gone through military records, had found the information, had sat at this table, this specific kitchen, these walls, this particular quiet, and asked, "What do we do with this?" And Ruth had said, "You know what we do." Caleb looked at the ceiling for a long time. He thought about the green backpack by the door with its smell of canvas and old machine oil. He thought about Marcus Merritt, who had never once mentioned Iraq in any way that revealed anything real, who had laughed with a silence before the sound, whose hands had been large and careful, who had apparently done something in a war that he never spoke about. In a moment no one witnessed and no one recorded except in the private gratitude of a man who spent the next 15 years trying to figure out how to repay it. That single moment had traveled forward in time through Walt's memory and Ruth's clarity, and a legal document and a cream-colored envelope and a $47 bus ticket all the way to this couch this night. This boy who was sleeping in a dead man's house in Kansas and still didn't fully understand why. Who were you, Caleb thought? Not with sadness, not with anger, just with the genuine and pressing desire to know. Who were you really, and why did you think I didn't need to know it too? Finn's ear twitched in his sleep. Outside, the Kansas wind moved through the October fields in long, slow waves. In the front pocket of his father's backpack, the letter with 2 sentences waited. Your father did not leave you much. This is what I owe him in return. Caleb reached over and turned off the lamp. In the dark in the house that now belonged to him because of something his father did in a war that nobody talked about, Caleb Merritt made a decision that was less a decision than a recognition of something already decided. He was going to find out. He was going to stay. He was going to figure out what his father had given away and what that meant and what it was worth. He was going to earn it, whatever that cost, whatever it required, however long it took. Part 2. What roots cost. The first morning on the farm started at 5:43. Not because Caleb set an alarm, because something outside made a sound like a large metal object striking a smaller metal object, which then struck the ground and rolled. He was upright before he was fully awake. 8 months of being the only adult in a household had rewired certain responses. Finn was already at the door. Outside in the gray pre-dawn, one of the irrigation pipe sections had come loose from its coupling overnight and was sitting at an angle in the mud like something that had given up on standing. It had taken 3 smaller connectors with it when it fell. Those connectors were somewhere in the field, in the dark, in the wet. Caleb stood in the yard in his socks, looked at the pipe. The pipe communicated a general attitude of indifference. Okay, he thought. Okay. Fine, how hard can irrigation be? It turned out very hard. It turns out irrigation involves physics and pressure and a set of specific mechanical relationships that do not announce themselves to people who have never thought about them before. Walt's technical journals were upstairs in the study. 4 of them, green hardcover filled with diagrams and measurements and notes about water pressure and soil absorption rates and seasonal adjustments. The notes assumed a base level of agricultural knowledge that Caleb absolutely did not possess. He read for 2 hours with his phone beside him running searches. Drip irrigation versus flood irrigation. PSI requirements for half-inch aluminum pipe. What is a gate valve exactly? Why does mine look the way it looks? Finn lay under the desk and watched him with an expression that was supportive but not specific about what he was supporting. By 7 in the morning, Caleb had acquired considerable theoretical understanding of irrigation systems and approximately zero practical ability to fix the specific broken pipe in the specific mud outside. He went out to look at it again, crouched beside the coupling, turned it in his hands. So this piece goes here, and this connects to that, and then you tighten this. With what? With what exactly do you tighten it? What tool? Caleb. Think. What tool? He looked at the barn. The barn had tools. The barn also had a wasp nest the size of a cantaloupe in the upper left corner of the doorframe, which he had discovered the previous evening, and was managing by simply never approaching that particular corner, which was obviously not a permanent solution. He went to the barn, stayed to the right side of the doorframe, reached carefully around, found a wrench hanging on a nail 3 inches from the wasp nest. The wasps did not respond. He considered this a minor diplomatic achievement and did not push his luck. By noon, he had reattached the main pipe. Sort of. It was attached. Whether it was attached correctly was a question answerable only when water actually moved through it, which required operating the pump, which required understanding the pump, which, according to Walt's journal, involved a specific startup sequence of 3 valves in a specific order. Walt had written, "Do not skip the sequence" in capital letters and underlined it twice, which was the written equivalent of grabbing someone by the shoulders. Caleb did not skip the sequence. He also failed to complete it correctly on the first attempt, or the second. The third attempt produced a grinding noise from somewhere beneath the ground that stopped when he shut off the main valve, and Caleb stood in the field, listening to the silence after it, and felt the particular exhaustion of someone who has been trying very hard at something and getting it wrong in ways they don't yet understand well enough to fix. His knees were caked with mud. His hands had grease from the coupling and dirt from the field, and something unidentified from the wrench. He was also, by some calculation he couldn't argue away, having the most purposeful morning he'd experienced in months, which was a strange thing to notice. But there it was. Dorothy Callahan appeared at 12:17. Not from the road, from the eastern fence line. She came through a gap in the wire with the ease of someone who has used that gap 10,000 times and expects it to be there. She crossed toward him at an unhurried pace, carrying 2 sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. She stopped when she reached him, looked at the pipe, looked at the pump housing, looked at him, said nothing. He said nothing. She looked at the pipe again for about 4 seconds. Then she walked to the pump housing, found an access panel on the side that Caleb had not noticed, opened it, and examined the interior. "You did the startup sequence." "Tried to. Valve 2 before valve 1. The journal said." The journal was written for Walt. Walt knew to go 1 before 2 because he'd done it for 10 years. She said it without heat, just as information. Valve 1, then 2, then 3, then main. She closed the panel, handed him a sandwich. He ate standing in the mud. Ham and sharp cheddar on bread that was clearly homemade, thick and slightly dense, in the way homemade bread is when someone makes it to actually eat rather than to display. He had the instinct not to thank her effusively. It felt like the wrong register for this person. "Thank you," he said. She nodded, looked at the pipe. "That coupling's on backward." "I know," he said. "I was going to fix it after lunch." He had not known that, but he was going to fix it after lunch regardless, which seemed like it should count for something. She almost smiled. The corner of her mouth moved in that direction and then reconsidered. "Eat," she said, and walked back toward the fence line. He fixed the coupling. He did the startup sequence in the correct order. The pump ran. Water moved through the pipes with a sound like a long, slow exhale, a system that had been waiting, built and planned and partially completed, and then interrupted when Walt's health started declining, finally doing the thing it had been designed to do. Caleb stood in the south field and watched the sprinkler heads come up one by one, slow arcs of water catching the afternoon light. Finn ran through the spray and came back soaking and thoroughly pleased with himself. Something in Caleb's chest shifted. Slightly, not dramatically. Just the small internal movement of something that has been stuck finally moving an inch. The legal papers arrived on Thursday. Glenn Hurst drove out personally, which told Caleb it was not routine business. He was still in a suit, still professional, still carrying the specific energy of a man who genuinely believes he is doing the practical and reasonable thing. He sat across from Caleb at the kitchen table. Finn sat beside Caleb and observed Glenn with the polite, unblinking attention of a dog who has decided to take detailed notes. "There's a legal issue my uncle may not have fully anticipated," Glenn said, "or may have underestimated." Caleb waited. "Kansas law is specific about property ownership for minors. You're 17. Until you reach 18, you cannot hold independent title to real property without a legal guardian who is a Kansas resident named in the guardianship documentation and formally approved by the court." He paused. "Walt did name a guardian in the will, Dorothy Callahan." "I know," Caleb said. "The documents mention her. She hasn't signed the guardianship agreement." Caleb absorbed this. "She hasn't signed. My office sent her the paperwork 3 weeks ago. She hasn't responded." "Did anyone actually talk to her?" Glenn paused. "The paperwork was sent." Caleb looked at the table for a moment. "If Mrs. Callahan doesn't sign within 30 days of the estate opening," Glenn continued, "the guardianship defaults. The court assigns an administrator. Given that you're out of state with no Kansas cosigner, the estate goes into receivership pending resolution." He looked at Caleb directly. "That process takes 6 to 18 months. During that time, the farm produces no income, and the tax obligations continue to grow." Outside, the wind came through the field. "I'm not trying to pressure you," Glenn said. "I know," Caleb said. "I'm trying to be accurate about what you're facing." "I know that too." Glenn looked at his hands for a moment, then back at Caleb. "My offer remains open." He left the papers on the table and drove away in the clean rental car. Caleb sat at the table after he left, looked at the documents, then looked at the wall where the photograph of Walt hung, Walt younger standing in the south field, squinting into the same light that was coming through the window right now. Walt named her. He planned all of this, the will, the conditions, the documents in the satchel, and he named Dorothy specifically. Which means he knew she might not sign immediately. Which means he expected this. Which means there's something else here. Something Walt knew that Caleb didn't know yet. "Walt, what did you see coming?" He walked to Dorothy's farm that evening. Finn came without being asked. He knocked. She answered quickly. The door opened too fast for someone who had been sitting down, which meant she had seen him coming across the field. He showed her the legal papers without preamble. She looked at them without touching them. "Walt named you specifically," he said. "I know." "Did you read the paperwork they sent?" "Yes." "Will you sign?" She looked at him. The porch light was on, and it made her face very clear. No hostility, no coldness. Just weight, something heavy that had been sitting behind her eyes for a long time and had decided to stay. "Come inside," she said. The inside of Dorothy's house surprised him. He wasn't sure what he'd expected, something spare, maybe something matching the practical efficiency she showed outside. But the house was full of plants. Not decorative plants arranged for appearance. Living, thriving, taking up space plants that had clearly been given exactly what they needed for exactly as long as they'd needed it. African violets on the windowsills. Something with long, dark, waxy leaves hanging from a ceiling hook. A cactus in the corner that had clearly decided to make the most of the situation. Terracotta pots along the kitchen counter with soil that looked well-tended and roots that were visibly happy. The house smelled like green things. Photographs on the walls. A man about Dorothy's age, open-faced, standing in the eastern field, her husband clearly. A younger man with dark hair and something in the jaw that echoed Dorothy's face. Family photographs going back through generations. The older ones black and white, the newer ones showing the specific colors of certain decades. She made tea without asking if he wanted it. He sat at the kitchen table. Finn sat beside him and examined the plants with professional interest. Dorothy set 2 mugs down and sat across from him. A moment of quiet. Then, "My husband Gerald died 7 years ago." Flat, factual. She was not performing grief. She was reporting history she had already lived through and organized into something she could carry. "Combine accident, on our land, on a Tuesday afternoon in September when the light was going." A pause that lasted exactly as long as it needed to. My son Patrick died 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. He was 35 years old. Caleb said nothing. Because there was nothing available to say that would be the right thing. I loved Walt and Ruth, Dorothy said. They were our neighbors for 23 years. When Gerald died, Walt came over every morning for 2 weeks. He didn't ask what I needed. He just looked at what needed doing and did it. She wrapped both hands around the mug. Ruth sat with me the night Patrick got his diagnosis. She didn't say anything particularly useful, but she stayed the whole night. She looked at the mug. Staying is sometimes the whole thing. Outside, somewhere in the dark, a nightbird moved through the trees. I know what Walt wanted, Dorothy said. I knew it before the paperwork arrived. Then why? Because. She stopped, looked at her hands on the mug. Because I'm 68 years old, and I have loved everyone I had and watched them all leave, and I am done. Her voice did not break. It was very steady. That steadiness was its own kind of weight. I am finished loving people and then having to keep living after. I am done having something to lose. The kitchen was very quiet. Finn stood up. Slowly and deliberately, the way he moved when he had assessed a situation and made a decision about it. He walked around the table to Dorothy's side and sat beside her chair and placed his chin on her knee. Just like that. Like he had been waiting for the right moment and had decided this was it. Dorothy looked down at him. Something shifted in her face. Very small. The way ice shifts when water starts moving underneath you, can't see the water, but you can see what it does to the surface. She didn't reach for him, but she didn't move away. Caleb said quietly, I'm not asking you to be responsible for me in any larger sense. I'm not asking you to be my family. He paused. I'm asking you to sign a piece of paper that lets me stay on land a man spent decades building because he wanted someone to take care of it after him. I don't want to be another thing you lose. I'm just asking for 6 months. Dorothy looked at him for a long time. Go home, she said finally. Let me think. He went home. He did not sleep particularly well. Finn slept at the end of the bed and moved in his dreams' paws, twitching against the blanket like he was running somewhere that required effort. Caleb lay in the dark and thought about Dorothy's kitchen full of living plants. All those plants. A woman who had said she was done, still keeping things alive anyway. Because that's what happens when you can't stop yourself. You keep tending things even when you've decided not to. Because the caring doesn't ask for permission first. It just continues. It just persists like an irrigation system doing its work in the dark, whether anyone is watching or not. Like a farm full of plans a man didn't live to finish. Like a kid from Tulsa sleeping in a dead man's bedroom trying to understand what his father gave away. He looked at the ceiling. The wind was low tonight, almost nothing. Somewhere in the south field, the sprinklers were running their slow, patient arcs in the dark, doing the work they were built for. Friday, Saturday. He worked. That was the whole of it. And the whole of it was enough to fill the days from before 6 until after dark. He fixed things that were broken. He learned the smaller tractor, the 2009 Kubota, that Walt's journal described as reliable, if you understand its moods, which turned out to be an oddly accurate way to describe a piece of machinery. The Kubota had moods. You had to approach it with a certain patience. Not literally speak to it, just not be impatient with it. It responded to patience the way most things do. He planted the winter cover crop in the south quadrant, following Walt's instructions exactly then, deviating slightly when the soil behaved differently from what the journal described. The deviation worked, which gave him the particular satisfaction of someone beginning to trust what their own hands are telling them. He called Sandra every evening at 7. She asked the same questions in the same order. Eating, mum, yes. Sleeping? Enough. Working too hard? No. Liar. Probably. She laughed. Her voice was thin. The treatment made it thin, but her laugh was full, and it traveled across 300 miles of wire and arrived complete. He did not tell her about the legal situation with Dorothy. Not because he was hiding it, because he had decided to solve it before he reported it. Worrying Sandra about unsolved problems was not something he was going to do when she had her own very serious problem to deal with. He would fix it first, then tell her. Probably. Finn started going to Dorothy's farm in the mornings. On his own, not invited. Caleb would come downstairs and Finn would not be in the kitchen, and he would look out the window and see the golden shape of him trotting through the gap in the eastern fence line toward Dorothy's property with the purposeful gait of a dog who has somewhere to be. Caleb did not call him back. The third morning, he watched from the window. Finn reached Dorothy's back door, sat, looked at the door. The door opened. Dorothy looked out, looked at Finn, said something that didn't carry across the distance. Finn wagged his tail. Dorothy crossed her arms. Finn wagged again. She sighed in a way that was visible even from across the field. And then she left the door open and went back inside. Finn went in. An hour later, he came back to the Greer farm. Caleb looked at him. Well, Finn looked back with the expression of a dog who has decided not to explain his methods. The fourth morning, the same. The fifth. On the sixth morning, Caleb was in the south field adjusting a sprinkler coupling when he heard footsteps on the packed dirt path between the fields. He looked up. Dorothy, walking toward him across the field. No basket, no tools, just walking in the direct way she did everything. She reached him. The soil in the North Quadrant is lower pH than Walt's last journal entry says, she said. He must have adjusted it after that entry was written. You'll need to lime it before the spring planting or your yield will disappoint you. Caleb blinked. Okay. And the well pump's secondary filter needs replacing. I'll show you which part to order. Okay. She looked at him. I'm going to need you not to make this a production. I won't. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, set it on the fence post between them. The guardianship agreement. Dorothy Callahan signed in firm blue ink with the date. Caleb looked at it, looked at her. She was already looking toward the North Quadrant with the professional focus of a woman thinking about soil chemistry. Get the lime ordered before the ground freezes, she said. You have 10 days at most. She turned and walked back toward her fence line without waiting for a response. Caleb picked up the signed paper. Finn materialized from wherever he'd been, the gap in the eastern fence probably, and sat beside him and looked at the paper. You did that, Caleb told him. Finn wagged once, modest but not particularly. That night, Caleb called Sandra. Eating was yes. Dorothy. She signed. A brief silence. Good, Sandra said, Mom, I told you she would. How did you know? Sandra was quiet for a moment. Because she kept her garden alive, she said. After everything she lost, she kept things growing. A pause. People who do that can't fully stop caring. They just need time to remember that they haven't. He sat with that after he hung up. Outside, the last amber light was leaving the Kansas sky in long horizontal bands. The signed paper was on the kitchen table. 3 weeks to the hearing. And then the phone rang at 10:47. St. Francis Medical Center. He answered before the second ring. The nurse's voice. Careful. The specific register of careful he had learned to read like a language. Sandra had developed a fever. Post-treatment infection. She was stable. She was responding to antibiotics. But she had been moved to the ICU as a precaution, and they were monitoring closely. He stood in the dark kitchen of Walter Greer's farm with the phone in his hand. Finn was beside him before he fully processed it, pressing against his leg with the steady warmth of something that will not be moved. He pressed his palm flat on the kitchen table. His father's old backpack was by the door. He could pack it in 3 minutes. He could be on a bus to Tulsa before dawn. But the hearing. But Glenn's petition. But Dorothy's signature and the guardianship and Walt's plan that had been built with such deliberate care across so many years. But he stood very still. On the wall, Walt squinted into the Kansas sun from his photograph. Standing in the south field, the same field where the cover crop was now doing its slow, patient work in the dark, because Caleb had followed the journal and trusted the deviation when the soil required it. He picked up his phone. He called Sandra. She answered on the second ring. Tired, but there. I heard, he said. I'm fine, she said. Mom, Caleb. Her voice was quiet, but each word was clear. Your father never walked away from something in the middle of it. It wasn't in him. A small breath. Tomorrow, do what you went there to do. I'll be here when it's done. He closed his eyes. I'll be on the first bus after, he said. I know, she said. Go to sleep. He put the phone down, looked at the kitchen, at the 2 small plants he'd added to the windowsill in the past few weeks, practical, not decorative, but there. At Ruth's notebook on the counter, at Walt on the wall, at Finn already curled at the foot of the stairs, already committed to tomorrow. Caleb turned off the light. He went upstairs. He did not sleep well, but he slept. Finn found the box on Sunday afternoon. This needs to be said, Finn found things. It was a pattern, not a coincidence. He had found a nest of field mice under the barn floor, which Caleb had relocated with more guilt than the situation strictly required. He had found a fence post driven into the ground at a dangerous angle that would have caught the tractor. He had found a leather glove buried in the west field that Walt's journals made no mention of, and which remained unexplained. But Sunday's discovery was different. Finn had been working the floor of the old storage shed on the western edge of the property, a small separate building half full of seed bags and old chemical containers, and the accumulated equipment of many decades. He kept returning to one corner to a section of floorboard near the base of the wall, scratching at it, sitting back, looking at Caleb, scratching again. Caleb crouched, pressed his palms to the boards. One of them moved, not rotted, deliberately unsealed. He found the edge, lifted it. Below, in a space about 12 inches deep, was a tin box with a clasp sealed around the edges with candle wax. He lifted it out, held it in both hands. Finn sat back with the expression of a dog who has completed the relevant part of his work. "Walt, you hid something, under the floor, in the shed. What is in this box?" He brought it to the kitchen table, got a knife to break the wax seal, stopped, put the knife down, sat for a moment with it. Then opened the box, Caleb. He opened the box. Inside, a guardianship agreement already signed by Walt, waiting for one more signature. A property survey, recent, dated within the past 2 years. A geological assessment report, 40 pages technical language with an executive summary at the front, because people who write technical reports always put the most important thing in the summary. The summary describes significant natural gas deposits beneath approximately 200 acres of the western portion of Greer Farm. The assessment had been commissioned by a company called Hearst Land Partners, LLC. Caleb read that name twice. Hearst Land Partners, Glenn Hearst. He sat very still. The next document was a letter on Hearst Land Partners letterhead dated 14 months ago, addressed to Walter Greer. The language was careful and professional and went on for several pages, but the substance was direct. Hearst Land Partners wanted to purchase the western portion of the property in conjunction with an energy extraction contract. The offer was substantial. The letter noted that if Walt chose not to sell, the company would support a compulsory acquisition petition to the state, which would allow extraction rights to be obtained through eminent domain proceedings. The final paragraph noted the letter was being sent as a professional courtesy given the family relationship. Glenn Hearst, Principal. The document beneath it was Walt's response. Handwritten, 1 page. Glenn, I received your letter and I understand your position clearly. My position is this: the land is not for sale and will not be for sale. Not to you, not to your company, not to any arrangement that would put equipment in the ground to take what's underneath it and leave the surface looking like something gave up. Do not contact me about this again. I have made my arrangements. Walt. He had known. He had known about the gas deposits. He had known about Glenn's company and Glenn's petition and Glenn's plan. He had known Glenn would come back after he was gone. And he had put these documents in a tin box and sealed it with candle wax and hidden it under the floorboards of the storage shed for whoever came after him, for Caleb to find, so that Caleb would know. Finn put his chin on the edge of the table. Caleb looked at the documents spread out in front of him. Walt planned all of this. Every piece. Every contingency. Glenn isn't just a nephew who thinks he knows better than a dead man. Glenn has a company. Glenn has surveyed this land. Glenn has been trying to get these gas rights since before Walt died, and he knows exactly what's under the western fields, and he knows what it's worth. And Walt saw it coming and built a structure to stop it. And the structure needs Dorothy's signature to work. Which means Dorothy is the piece Glenn didn't count on. Or the piece he was counting on not signing. Because he sent the paperwork and waited 3 weeks and she hadn't responded. He sat back, looked at the ceiling, thought about Walt sitting at this kitchen table receiving Glenn's letter, writing his response with steady hands and a steady pen. Do not contact me about this again. Then going upstairs to the study and beginning to build the structure that would hold after he was gone. Working through every detail, every contingency, including a 17-year-old boy from Tulsa, including a golden retriever who finds things under floors. Walt. Who were you? He went to Dorothy's farm the next morning. Finn came. She was in the kitchen garden when he arrived, kneeling in the soil, pulling the last of the season's root vegetables before the frost got them. She heard him coming and didn't look up immediately. Finished what she was doing. Set the vegetables in a basket, then stood and looked at him. He held up the tin box. She looked at it. Where did that come from? Under the floorboards in the west shed. He paused. Finn found it. She looked at Finn for a moment, then at the box. What's inside Mushu's guardianship agreement with Walt's signature? Geological surveys, letters between Walt and Glenn. He let that sit a moment. Glenn has a company, Hearst Land Partners. There's natural gas under the western fields. He's been trying to buy the extraction rights since before Walt died. Dorothy was very still. Walt knew, Caleb said. Yes, she said, Walt knew. You knew too. It was not a question, and she didn't treat it as one. Walt told me last year when he understood he wasn't going to recover, she said. She set the basket down on the fence post. He told me what Glenn wanted, what he'd decided to do about it. He asked me to sign the guardianship agreement because you'd need someone who could help you fight it if it came to that. But you didn't sign. A pause. I told you why. I know. The wind moved through the dry stalks of what had been the summer garden. The hearing is in 3 weeks, Caleb said. If the guardianship isn't established, the estate goes into receivership. Glenn's petition to assess the gas rights separately from the land could move through while everything is in legal limbo. He paused. That's probably exactly what he's waiting for. Dorothy looked out over her field, her husband's field once, her son's field for a while, hers alone now and tended alone every day regardless. She didn't say anything. He didn't push. He placed the tin box on the fence post between them and walked back to the Greer farm. He worked for the rest of the day without stopping for lunch. November arrived. It came to Kansas the way Kansas. November comes not gradually but decisively, as if the season had made a firm decision and was committed to seeing it through. Cold and gray and serious. The kind of weather that doesn't negotiate. Caleb worked. The South Quadrant's cover crop was in and beginning to do its slow work. The irrigation system ran all 3 lines with consistent pressure and no leaks. The barn roof's 2 damaged sections had new metal over them. The warped sliding door had new hardware. He had learned the Kubota's moods. He had learned that the field nearest the road had drainage better than Walt's notes suggested, which meant earlier spring planting was possible. He had learned that Kansas sunsets take their time, more horizon to cover apparently. He called Sandra every evening. Eating, yes. The cornbread. Making my own now. You have not. I have. It's not as good as hers. What's her recipe? She won't tell me. She says I should figure it out by trying. A laugh, thin voice, full laugh. 300 miles of wire and it arrived whole. I like her, Sandra said. She hasn't fully decided about me yet. She will, Sandra said, just like that. Not as encouragement, as fact. Finn kept going to Dorothy's farm in the mornings. The routine established itself without discussion. Every morning, Finn trotted through the gap in the fence, sat at Dorothy's back door, waited for it to open. Every morning, Dorothy looked at him, said something, and left the door open. Every morning, Finn went in for an hour and came back. Caleb watched from the window on the 3rd morning. Finn reached the door, sat. The door opened. Dorothy stood there looking at him with her arms crossed. Finn's tail swept back and forth. Dorothy sighed from a distance, left the door open. Finn went inside. Caleb looked at him when he came back. Well, Finn declined to explain himself. On the 6th morning, Caleb was adjusting a sprinkler head in the south field when he heard footsteps on the path. Looked up. Dorothy, walking toward him. No basket, no tools, just walking. She reached him. The soil in the North Quadrant is lower pH than Walt's journal says. You'll need lime before spring. Okay. The well pump's secondary filter. I'll show you which part to order. Okay. She looked at him. I need you not to make this a bigger thing than it is. I won't. She pulled the folded guardianship agreement from her jacket pocket and set it on the fence post between them. Signed, Dorothy Callahan, firm blue ink. Caleb looked at it, looked at her. She was already looking at the North Quadrant, thinking about pH levels. Lime. 10 days, she said. She turned and walked back toward her fence line. Caleb picked up the paper. Finn appeared at his side. You did that, Caleb told him. Finn wagged once. Not modest about it at all, really. That night, Caleb called Sandra. Dorothy signed. A moment of silence. Good, Sandra said. How did you know she would? Because she kept her garden alive after losing everyone, Sandra said. After all of it, she kept things growing. She paused. People who do that can't stop caring. They just need time to find it again. 3 weeks to the hearing, and the night before the hearing, 10:47 St. Francis called. Sandra, fever, post-treatment infection, stable, responding, ICU as precaution. Caleb stood in the dark kitchen with the phone in his hand and Finn pressing against his leg. His father's backpack was by the door. The hearing was in the morning. Walt's plan was in the satchel on the counter. Dorothy's signature was on the table. He called Sandra. She answered on the second ring. I'm fine, she said before he could speak. Mom. Caleb, your father never left something unfinished in the middle of it. It wasn't in him. A breath. Tomorrow, do what you went there to do. He closed his eyes for a long moment. First bus after, he said. I know, she said. Sleep. He turned off the light. He did not sleep well, but he slept. And in the morning, he was going to be there. Part 3. The Harvest. He was up at 4:45. Not an alarm, not the farm's usual announcements. He was simply done sleeping. The dark outside the bedroom window was complete. Kansas dark, no city glow anywhere, no highway orange on the horizon, no gas station sign blurring the edge of things. Just black and stars and the sound of wind in fields that had started to feel like something his. He lay still for 3 minutes, then got up. Finn was already sitting by the door, ears up, waiting without impatience. He made coffee in Walt's old percolator that took 11 minutes and produced something that was technically coffee, in the same way that a utility knife is technically a kitchen tool, functional, direct, not interested in being pleasant about it. He drank it, standing at the kitchen window. The November dark held everything still. The hearing was at 10. 6 hours. He thought about Sandra in the ICU. Stable, the nurse had said. Responding, words designed to reassure. They did mostly, except at 4:45 in the morning in a dark kitchen when the coffee was bad and the thing you were about to do was the most consequential thing you'd done in 17 years of living, and you were doing it without anyone who had known you for more than 3 weeks. Except not without anyone. Finn pressed against his leg. Right. Not without anyone. He finished the coffee and put on the cleanest clothes he had, dark jeans and the gray button-down that had been his father's, slightly too wide across the shoulders in a way that had always embarrassed him before and did not embarrass him this morning. He packed the satchel, the geological survey, the letters between Walt and Glenn, Walt's handwritten refusal, the guardianship agreement, Dorothy's signature in firm blue ink, and Ruth's notebook. Not as evidence, just because Ruth had started all of this with a sentence written when her hands were barely cooperating, telling Walt not to argue with her when she was gone, and she deserved to be in the room when it concluded. Dorothy knocked at 7:30. 3 knocks, her rhythm, deliberate. He opened the door. She was in a dark blazer over her flannel shirt, which was the most formal he had seen her. Her gray-white hair combed back. She held a thermos. She looked at him, looked at the satchel. You have everything from the box. Signed agreement, front pocket. She nodded, handed him the thermos. Her coffee, which he had learned was categorically different from the percolator situation. Drink this in the truck. You look like you slept for 40 minutes. Closer to 3 hours. Same thing when you're 17. She turned toward the truck. Finn stays. Finn, sitting at Caleb's left knee, looked at Dorothy with an expression of profound and specific personal offense. He'll be fine, Caleb said. I know he'll be fine, Dorothy said. I need him here to make sure nothing goes sideways while we're gone. Which was not a practical reason, which Finn clearly understood. But he went inside when Caleb held the door, and he turned in the kitchen doorway and looked at both of them with the dignified resignation of a dog who has decided to trust the people in charge of the plan, even when he disagrees with his role in it. The door closed. Dorothy was already in the truck. The Ashford County Courthouse was a brick building from 1923 with a flagpole out front and a parking lot that was half full at 9:45 in the morning which for a small county courthouse on a November Tuesday meant the hearing had drawn attention. Caleb hadn't expected that. He didn't know who these people were. Farmers from adjacent land, people who had known Walt, people who followed what happened to property in a county where property is not abstract, where land is the thing that gives a place its identity and its memory. Small towns care about land the way they care about very little else. He walked in with Dorothy beside him and the satchel over his shoulder and felt entirely and accurately 17 years old. The hearing room was smaller than he'd imagined it. A long table, a three-person panel, two men and a woman all in their 60s, with the composed patience of people who have sat on enough county boards that very little surprises them anymore. A court recorder in the corner, chairs along the wall with people in them that Caleb didn't know. Glenn Hurst was already at the table. Suit, briefcase, a second man beside him, clearly a lawyer with the particular posture of someone who tracks billable hours unconsciously. Glenn looked at Caleb when he walked in. Not hostile, not triumphant, something more complicated. Something that registered the satchel and then looked away. Dorothy sat beside Caleb. She did not look at Glenn. She looked at the panel and arranged her hands on the table and was perfectly still in the way of someone who has decided exactly what they are going to do. Commissioner Aldrich Eleanor. The woman on the panel looked at the room. We're here to review the guardianship petition in the matter of the Greer estate, specifically whether the named guardian has met the conditions required under Kansas property law to enable title transfer to the minor beneficiary. She looked at Caleb. Mr. Merritt, named beneficiary. Yes, ma'am. Currently 17. Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Callahan, named guardian. Yes, Dorothy said. Your signature on the guardianship agreement arrived at this office on Monday of this week. That's correct. Within the required period. Yes. Glenn's lawyer leaned toward him and said something low. Aldrich looked at Glenn's side of the table. Mr. Hurst, you filed a petition to contest the transfer. That's correct, said the lawyer beside Glenn. On what grounds? Our position is that the named guardian did not establish adequate relationship with the minor prior to the guardianship filing, that the circumstances of the bequest are unusual, and that the estate may not be able to meet its legal obligations without external investment. A pause. We'd asked the court to consider whether expert testimony on the estate's financial situation would be appropriate, which was a careful way of saying there is gas under that land and someone should be permitted to extract it. Caleb reached into the satchel. He laid the documents on the table in order. The geological assessment, the letter from Hearst Land Partners, Walt's handwritten response. He set them out flat without theatrics. No speech, no preamble, just the documents arranged so the panel could read them clearly. These were found on the property, he said, in a sealed container. They include a geological assessment commissioned by Hearst Land Partners, LLC, a letter from Glenn Hurst to Walter Greer proposing purchase of natural gas extraction rights, and Mr. Greer's written response. The panel looked at the documents. Commissioner Aldrich picked up Walt's handwritten letter. Read it. Set it down. Glenn had gone completely still. His lawyer began to say something. Glenn put his hand on the lawyer's arm, stopped him. He looked at Walt's letter on the table, just for a moment. Then he looked at Caleb, and something in his face changed. Not suddenly. Slowly, the way things change when a person stops performing and starts actually seeing something. He looked at the letter in Walt's handwriting, not the copied version, not the typed version that had gone through legal channels. The actual letter, in Walt's actual hand. Do not contact me about this again. I have made my arrangements. Glenn picked the letter up. Read it. Set it down. His lawyer started speaking again. Glenn shook his head. Commissioner, Glenn said. His voice was different from before. Less professional. More tired. The tiredness of a man who has been carrying an argument for a long time and has just now felt its weight. May I say something directly? Aldrich looked at him. Go ahead. Glenn put both palms flat on the table. My uncle and I did not have an easy relationship in the last few years of his life, he said. He was looking at the table. Not performing honesty, just being honest, which looks different. I believed I was being practical. I believed the land needed to be used in a way that would actually sustain itself financially. I believed my uncle was being sentimental about soil that had something more valuable underneath it. He paused. I told myself I was thinking about the community, about the future of the estate. He glanced at the letter. Walt saw through that. He always saw through the stories I told myself. The room was quiet. I've read the will 5 times, Glenn continued. I've read every letter he sent me, including, he looked at the handwritten page on the table, apparently not all of them. A breath, him. My uncle was not a careless man. He was not impulsive. When he decided something, he had thought it through from every direction. He looked at Caleb directly, something steady in that look, something that had stopped calculating. He chose this kid. He chose him carefully and specifically. He built a structure around that choice that is still working right now in this room exactly as he designed it. He reached into his briefcase, took out his own folder, placed it on the table. I'm withdrawing the petition, he said. All of it. The guardianship contest, the eminent domain inquiry, everything. His lawyer looked at him sharply. Glenn did not look back. Whatever my uncle put in place, he said to Commissioner Aldrich, I won't stand in front of it. The room was very quiet, long. Aldrich looked at the documents, at Glenn, at Dorothy, at Caleb. Mr. Merritt, she said, do you intend to remain on the property and fulfill the conditions of the estate? Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Callahan, you accept the guardianship responsibilities as outlined? Yes, Dorothy said. One word, firm as the blue ink on the agreement. Aldrich looked briefly at her colleagues. A quiet exchange, then back to the room. The court finds the guardianship valid and the estate transfer in order. The Greer farm passes to Caleb James Merritt under the guardianship of Dorothy Callahan, subject to the 6-month residency requirement and the tax obligations as scheduled. She closed the folder. This hearing is concluded. That simply, that finally. Outside the courthouse in the cold November air, Glenn stopped beside Caleb in the parking lot. His lawyer was already in the car. Glenn had his hands in his coat pockets. He looked like a man who had set something down. I don't know what my uncle told you about me, he said. Not much, Caleb said. The documents told me more. Glenn nodded, accepting this without argument. What's under that land would have been worth considerable money, he said. To the company, to me. He paused. I convinced myself that was also the practical thing for the estate, for the area, that the extraction revenue would... He stopped. Walt saw through what I was telling myself. He always did. Caleb looked at him. He said in his letter not to contact him again, Caleb said. He did. But he still mentioned you in the will. Glenn looked at him. He what? There's a section about why the farm isn't going to you. Caleb paused. He wrote, I am not leaving this farm to my nephew because my nephew has enough. I am leaving it to a boy who has nothing except what his father gave him, which turns out to be more than enough. He let that sit a moment. He named you by name, not to cut you out, to explain the difference between the two of you. Glenn was very still. You have enough, Caleb said. He knew that about you. Something crossed Glenn's face that was not comfortable. Something true. He nodded once. Take care of the land, he said quietly, and got in the car and drove away. Dorothy was standing beside the truck. She had heard all of it. She said nothing. She just opened the passenger door and held out the thermos. Still coffee in it. He was on a bus to Tulsa by 2:15. Dorothy drove him to the station. Finn rode in the truck bed with his nose into the wind, fulfilling what was clearly his sense of his own purpose. At the station, Dorothy pressed a paper bag into his hands. Cornbread, a container of soup, and at the bottom a folded note in her handwriting. The lime needs to go in the north quadrant before the 15th. 2 applications. I'll do the first while you're gone. You do the second when you get back. Come back. He looked up. She was already walking to the truck. He almost called after her. She raised one hand without turning around. The gesture of someone who has said exactly what she meant and does not require acknowledgement of it. Sandra was in room 419, not the ICU. They'd moved her that morning, the infection-responding fever dropping numbers going in the right direction. The nurse at the desk gave him the room number with an actual smile, not the careful kind. He walked fast, not quite running, knocked twice, pushed the door open. Sandra was sitting up, pale, thin, and IV in her left arm. Her hair was shorter than when he'd left. The treatment had taken more of it, and she'd cut what remained close and even, which was exactly the practical thing she would do. She looked at him. He looked at her. "You're not on the bus," she said. "I got off the bus. I'm here." The hearing. It went well. Dorothy signed. Glenn withdrew. The farm is mine. He sat in the chair beside the bed. "It's done." Sandra closed her eyes for a moment. Just a moment. Then opened them and looked at him with the expression she used when she was feeling something large and had decided for her own reasons to keep it contained at the practical level. "Tell me everything," she said. So he did. He stayed 3 days. He slept in the chair beside her bed the first night, which the nurses permitted, with the professional flexibility of people who have learned when rules should give way to something more important. Sandra told him to go to the waiting room and sleep properly. He stayed in the chair. She did not argue about it twice. In the mornings, he brought her coffee from the good cart on the second floor. In the afternoons, he sat beside her and read while she rested, both of them in the same space, in the way that people who have lived together long enough are simply comfortable in proximity without needing to fill it. On the second day, Dr. Okafor came in and brought her glasses down. The surgery remained viable. The infection had pushed the timeline by approximately 2 weeks but had not changed the underlying picture. Sandra's numbers were where they needed to be for the procedure. They would schedule for mid-December. The cost was unchanged. Caleb had done the math on the bus. The grain supply contract in Walt's estate documents a standing arrangement with a regional distribution cooperative, renewable annually rate fixed and favorable, would begin generating real income if the spring planting came in at the levels Walt's journal projected. And Walt's projections had been accurate on the cover crop to within 4%, which gave Caleb reason to trust them. Not $34,000 in the first 6 months, but a consistent plannable number that was entirely different from $41 in a diner napkin. Consistently was different. Consistently meant something could be built toward. He told Sandra about the contract. She listened with the full attention she brought to everything worth understanding. "You've been reading his journals every night," she said. "Every night." "What's he like, Walt?" Caleb thought about it. "Exact," he said. "About everything. He never wrote about or roughly. Every number is specific. Every plan has a fallback." He paused. "He sounds like someone who spent a long time in the situations he couldn't control and then spent the rest of his life getting very precise about everything within his reach." Sandra was quiet for a moment. "That sounds like someone else I know," she said. He didn't answer, but he didn't disagree. On the third afternoon, Dorothy called. He stepped into the hallway. "Lime delivery came a day early," she said, without greeting. This was simply her way. "First application done yesterday. North quadrant's better than expected. Walt's pH reading must be 2 or 3 years old. Soil's improved since then." A pause. "Finn has been reorganizing the kitchen." "What do you mean reorganizing?" "Your boots were by the door. They're now beside the couch. Your jacket from the hook is on the floor, which I replaced. The throw pillow from the couch is on his sleeping spot, which I left because he can have it." Caleb leaned against the hospital corridor wall. "Thank you, Dorothy." "For what?" "All of it." A pause. "Come back before the 15th, she said. "The second Lyme application needs someone who's seen the North Quadrant after the first one." "I'll be there by the 12th. She hung up without further comment. He stood in the hallway for a moment. A woman about his mother's age walked by with a visitor badge and glanced at him because he was standing in a hospital corridor, smiling at his phone for no apparent reason. He went back into room 419. Sandra looked at him. "Dorothy, Finn stole the throw pillow." Sandra's face broke into her full smile, the one that starts in her eyes several seconds before her mouth catches up. "I like her," she said. The night before he left, Sandra asked for the satchel. He had brought it from Tulsa out of habit, not wanting to leave Walt's documents unattended, which was probably no longer necessary, but some habits need time to release. She went through the papers slowly, not the legal ones. She set the geological survey aside after a glance. She read Glenn's letter carefully. She read Walt's handwritten refusal twice. Then she found the envelope at the bottom of the satchel. He had placed it there himself that morning. He hadn't mentioned it. The envelope was addressed in Dorothy's handwriting, not to Caleb, to Sandra Merritt. For Sandra Merritt, from Walt Greer. He asked me to hold this until it was over. Sandra looked at Caleb. He shook his head. I haven't opened it. It's for you. Her hands were steadier than he'd expected when she opened it. 3 pages, Walt's angular, deliberate script. She read slowly. He looked at the window, at the parking lot below, at the particular quality of hospital light at night, fluorescent and shadowless and permanent. Sandra was quiet for a long time. Then he describes it, she said. Her voice had shifted lower, slower. The day in Iraq. He writes it all out. Caleb looked at her. There was a supply convoy, she said. Walt was attached to an agricultural assessment team working on irrigation infrastructure. He was surveying systems for a reconstruction project in the area. The convoy was hit at a checkpoint outside Mosul. 3 vehicles. 2 took fire. She paused. Walt was in the second vehicle. It took a hit. He was thrown. He couldn't get his bearings. Couldn't get to cover on his own. She looked up from the letter. Your father was in the security detail 50 meters ahead. He came back. He didn't have to. His position was already clear. He came back anyway. She looked at the letter. Walt says your father covered him until the firing stopped, then pulled him to safety. Walt says it took about 90 seconds. She paused. He says it felt considerably longer than that, Caleb breathed. Your father never asked Walt's name, Sandra continued. He was already moving before Walt could say anything. Walt grabbed his arm and said thank you. Your father said... She stopped, looked at the letter again carefully, as if she needed to have the exact words. He said I have a family at home. So do you probably. Go home to them. The room was very quiet. And the convoy moved, Sandra said, and Walt went home. She set the letter in her lap, and Marcus came home eventually too. She looked at Caleb, and he never said a word about it. No, Caleb said, because to him it probably wasn't extraordinary. I think so. Sandra was quiet. She looked at the letter in her lap for a moment. That was your father, she said. Not with sadness, not dramatically. With the quiet recognition of someone who knew the person being described and is hearing something true about them. He would have thought it was simply what you do when someone needs it. Walt thought it was extraordinary. They were both right, Sandra said. Walt was right about what Marcus did, and Marcus was right that it was just what you do. She held the letter in both hands for a moment. The remarkable thing about your father was that remarkable things didn't register as remarkable to him. He just did them and moved on. Caleb looked at his hands. He was carrying it wrong, though, he said. Quiet, not angry, just accurate. Whatever he saw over there, he was carrying it alone. Yes, Sandra said. He was. That was his mistake. She reached over and put her hand on his. When something is worth carrying, carry it the right way. Not alone. Not in silence. The right way. He left the next morning before she woke. He stood in the doorway of room 419 for a moment. She slept on her back, completely still in the way she had always slept. She had said once that sleep was the one thing that couldn't be taken from her, so she wasn't going to let worry take it either. Even in the worst months, she slept. He had always found this both admirable and slightly unreachable, that capacity to put things down completely for 8 hours. He looked at her for a moment, then he left. The bus back was longer, or he was more tired, or Kansas was wider in this direction. He read Walt's journals on the ride, not the technical sections, the personal ones. The entries Walt wrote in margins and on blank pages when he was thinking about something that wasn't crop yield or equipment maintenance. One entry written 2 years before Walt died on a December page. Ruth always said November was honest and December was kind. I think what she meant was the way the year ends, everything stripped down, nothing pretending to be more than it is. When the leaves go, you can see the actual shape of things. What's actually there is good land. What's actually there is worth keeping. Caleb read it twice, looked out the window at the Kansas highway, unspooling ahead. What's actually there is good land. What's actually there is worth keeping. Dorothy's truck was in the driveway when he arrived. She was in the north quadrant, walking the edge of where she'd laid the first lime application, making notes in a small notebook. She looked up when she heard the car. He paid the driver, picked up his bag. She waited until the car left. Then north quadrant looks better already. You said on the phone. Saying it again. She looked at the field. Second application goes in Thursday if you want to do it yourself. I'll do it Thursday. She nodded, went back to her notebook. He picked up his bag and started toward the house. Caleb. He stopped. She was still looking at her notebook, writing something. Walt chose well, she said. Simple, clear, the way Dorothy said things that she had decided were simply true. He turned toward the house. Finn was at the window. He could see the golden shape of him, front paws on the sill, face pressed toward the glass tail, moving in slow sweeps. The throw pillow, visible from outside, was back on the couch where it was supposed to be, which meant Finn had moved it back before they arrived, which was either coincidence or a dog with a precise sense of timing. Caleb chose to believe the latter. The harvest came in April. Not winter wheat, that was June, but the early cover crop turned in March and left the soil better than Walt's projections. And Caleb planted the first commercial yield ahead of schedule because the North Quadrant's pH had evened out after the lime applications, and the South drainage was performing better than any entry in the journal. Dorothy said, "Don't get proud about it." He said, "I'm not proud." She said, "You're standing in the field looking at it like it owes you a debt." He said, "I'm looking at it because I planted it and it grew." She almost smiled, closer than usual. By late April, 3 neighboring farmers appeared on a Saturday morning without being asked. Trucks in the driveway. Equipment. The general attitude of people for whom showing up is its own explanation. One had worked land adjacent to Greer Farm for 30 years. One had known Walt since they were both in their 30s. The third was a woman named Priscilla, 71, who ran a grain operation with her son 2 properties over, and who arrived with a large casserole and supervised the entire operation with the authority of someone who has long since stopped needing to explain her qualifications. Glenn Hurst arrived at noon. No suit, worn jeans, a flannel shirt that appeared to be an actual flannel shirt and not something purchased to look like one. Work boots with mud already on them from some earlier part of his morning. He stood at the edge of the driveway, looked at Caleb. Caleb looked at him. A beat. "I know how to drive a combine," Glenn said. Caleb looked at the large green machine sitting near the barn, which he himself did not yet know how to operate. "Combine's yours," he said. Glenn nodded once, and that was that. That evening, after the field was turned and the equipment was put away and Priscilla's casserole had been eaten in the farmyard because there were too many people for the kitchen and the late April weather had decided to be generous, Caleb sat on the porch steps, Finn beside him, head on Caleb's knee in the specific way Finn used when he had decided something was worth the weight of his attention. The Kansas light was doing what Kansas light does, leaving slowly in layers. First the bright, then the warm, then the long amber bands that stretch out flat across the fields and linger there like something left behind on purpose. He called Sandra. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was stronger than it had been in November. The surgery had been mid-December. Recovery slower than they'd hoped, faster than the worst case. Dr. Okafor had used the word encouraging at the last appointment, which was a word she used carefully and meant carefully. "How did it go?" Sandra asked. "Good. We had help." He paused. Glenn came. Silence. Glenn Hurst. He drove the combine. A longer silence. "Well," Sandra said. "Yeah." Walt would have said, she stopped. "Actually, I'm not sure what Walt would have said. I think he would have said it was appropriate," Caleb said. "That Glenn did the right thing in the end." "Maybe. I think Walt always believed people could do the right thing eventually. He just didn't wait around for it. He built a structure that made it harder not to." Sandra was quiet for a moment. "That's a generous reading of it," she said. "It's what the journals suggest. He was a good man." "He was a very deliberate one," Caleb said, "which might be the same thing over enough years." Sandra laughed, that full laugh, still thin in places but fuller than November, traveling across the distance and arriving whole. "Mom, I want to read you something." He had the satchel beside him. He'd known he'd want it tonight. He took out Walt's letter, the 3 pages Dorothy had kept for Sandra, that Sandra had pressed into his hands when he left the hospital. "Keep these with you for a while." He found the section. "I want his son to know this, not because Marcus Merritt needs the recognition. Men like him generally don't want it and would refuse it if offered. But because a boy should understand what kind of man his father was. Not the part his father kept quiet, the part that was so fundamental to who he was that it never occurred to him to mention it. He came back for me because it was the right thing to do. That was the whole of it. No calculation before the decision. No hesitation in the action. He looked at the situation and he knew what right looked like, and he moved toward it. That kind of person is rarer than we claim when we talk about admiring them. And he left a son, and I want that son to know what he came from. Caleb stopped reading. The amber was almost gone now. The fields were dark and still and full of things growing below the surface that no one could see yet, but that were there doing their slow and necessary work. Sandra was quiet on the phone. Not empty quiet, full quiet. The kind that means something is being felt and held carefully. He knew, she said finally. Yeah, your dad. He knew what he was doing out there, he just didn't announce it. No, Caleb said. He didn't. Finn shifted his weight against Caleb's leg. I'm proud of you, Sandra said. Both of you. Your father and you. For different things and in different ways. He sat with that. Let it settle. Come in June, he said. After you've had a little more time to get your strength back. Come and see it. The farm. The fields are something in June. Walt wrote about it. He was right about most things he wrote about. I'll come in June, she said. Not as a question, as a plan. He hung up. He sat in the dark with Finn against his leg, and the Kansas night coming in full around them, clear and deep, and full of stars that the flatland let you see edge to edge, without anything in the way. He thought about Marcus Merritt, who had come back across 50 meters of fire for a man he didn't know because it was right, who had never mentioned it to anyone, who had laughed with a silence before the sound, whose hands had been large and careful and always seemed to know what they were doing, who had said, I have a family at home, who had come home to that family, and then left too soon in the way that the body keeps its own accounting regardless of what the rest of you needs. But not before something was built. Not before some stubborn, specific thing was placed in Caleb, the thing that had put him on a bus to Kansas with $41 and a satchel and a golden retriever and no plan. The thing that had made him open the gate, read the journals, fix the pipe, learn the sequence, do the lime applications, show up to the hearing, stay, come back. He reached down and scratched Finn behind the ears. Finn made a low sound of satisfaction and pressed closer. Inside the house on the living room wall, Caleb had hung 3 photographs. Walt Greer, squinting into the Kansas sun, standing in the south field that was now producing what he had always planned for it to produce. Ruth Greer, a photograph Dorothy had brought over last month. Ruth Younger caught mid-sentence clearly in the middle of being opinionated about something, laughing at the edge of it. The kind of photograph that catches a person being entirely themselves. And Marcus Merritt, in uniform, the photograph from the front pocket of the green backpack. His father young, looking at the camera with the serious attention of a man who understands that photographs are records of things that matter, and things that matter deserve to be looked at directly. 3 people who had never sat at the same table, who had never been in the same room, who had never known each other's voices or laughed at the same thing, connected anyway by 90 seconds in a dusty checkpoint outside Mosul, by one person seeing what right looked like and moving toward it without announcement, and everything that unfolded from there, across years, across distance, across an envelope in a mailbox on a Tuesday afternoon that had started it all moving toward this porch, this field, this sky, this boy who was not lost anymore and knew for the first time since he was 9 years old exactly where he was. Caleb sat on the steps of the Greer farm, his land, his responsibility, and his beginning, and let the dark and the quiet settle around him the way they do when there is nowhere else you are supposed to be. Finn put his chin on Caleb's knee, and for the first time since his father died, for the first time in 8 years of being the man of the house, and working nights and counting tips and running numbers that never added up, and fighting towards something that kept moving further away every time he got close. For the first time in all of it, Caleb Merritt let himself simply be still, and the still was not empty. It was full of things that had been planted and tended and had taken a long time to grow the way the best things always do. It was full of what his father had given away without knowing it would come back. It was full of what Walt and Ruth had built out of gratitude and didn't live to see finished. It was full of what Dorothy had offered when she crossed the fence line with her hands in her jacket pockets and said Walt chose well. It was full of his mother's voice saying, I'll come in June. As a plan, it was enough. It was more than enough. It was, Caleb thought, sitting in the dark under the stars with Finn warm against his leg and 3 photographs on the wall inside, and a farm all around him that his father had made possible with 90 seconds of doing the right thing, exactly what it was supposed to be.